So my name's Ben Hutchins. I write for the Quad City Times, and I'm wondering what has Iowa State been like for you?
Yeah, it's been a great couple months. It's been busy. I really enjoyed my time here so far. Being a part of the coaching staff, having a relationship with some of the guys prior to getting here, but really getting ingrained into the program has been awesome. It's been busy at home. We just had twin boys on St. Patrick's Day, so sleep's a thing of the past right now, but everything's been going great so far.
Congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Noah, we talked to Noah Pauly earlier, and he told us about your guys' relationship. What's it been like to rejoin forces with him, and how part of your relationship was coming back to Iowa State?
Yeah, I think me and Noah's history goes back now over a decade, and him and I are very close. We were both in each other's weddings, and to be able to go to work with a guy that you're that close with every single day has just been awesome. And for him to kind of be my in to get an opportunity here obviously was a huge help, and getting around him down at some of the conventions and things like that, and being able to get to know some of the coaches was a big part of it as well.
Hi, Coach. I'm Rob Gray with Cedar Rapids Gazette and Cyclone Fanatic. Could you sketch out your bio a little bit for me? I mean, I know there's probably an official one.
Yeah.
They're on the website, but I mean, who was your biggest mentor? Just how did you fall into this profession?
Yeah, great question. For me, I grew up in a household where my parents were both teachers, so I was very fortunate. I got to go to high school football practice every single day, and Grand Forks, North Dakota. My dad was a high school football coach, and my biggest mentor is Mike Berg. He was my high school football coach. He's in the National High School Coaches Hall of Fame. Still text and email to this day. He's had a huge influence on me, not only as a coach but as a person, as a whole. And he's stuck with me, and still a lot of the guys that he had an impact throughout our lives. But for me, that would be the biggest one. My first coaching job was at Minnesota Duluth. That's where I got to know Coach Pauly, a guy by the name of Kurt Weezy. He's the head coach there now. That's the first guy that I ever worked for, and I learned a ton from him. But there's a ton of guys that I was fortunate to be around, whether it's head coaches or assistants that have had an impact and allowed me to be in the position that I'm in today. And I feel I've worked at the Division III level, the Division II level, FCS and FBS, and I wouldn't trade any of those opportunities that I've had. It keeps you hungry, keeps you with a chip on your shoulder, that you want to go out and you prove that you know what you're doing, and you don't forget those humble beginnings where you're painting the lines for camp and you're doing those sorts of things, that kind of get lost in everything.
Bill Seals with Cyclone Report on the Rivals Network. What you bring kind of a new perspective to, I guess maybe a fresh look at the running back room. Somebody that didn't really recruit any of those guys. Didn't probably know a lot about them going into when you took the job. But what do you see in that group? And is it one maybe where you could see like a Carson Hansen become like the workhorse there, or do you want to use multiple guys?
Yeah, great question. I think coming in, this is a group that they're very competitive. Getting here for the end of winter workouts, I picked up on that very quickly. From Carson to Abu down to River Peppers, the guys that just got here. Very competitive group. They're very fun. They're fun to be around. They know when to enjoy being around one another in a meeting, but then they also know when to lock in. And I think for me, being able to come in and just have that outside perspective of being able to look at what happened last year from the running back room, of what was really good and what can each individual get better at. I think that's a good perspective you can have when you're a new coach coming in, and those guys are able to come in and ask, like, hey, what can I do better? And me to be able to give a honest evaluation, I think is big. And to answer your question about Carson, Carson and Abu have played a lot of football, and I'm excited to continue to work with those guys, just to see, their leadership within the room continue to grow, and their overall knowledge, I think, is something that we're harping on right now this spring.
And Dylan Lee, physically, I mean, he looks the part. Is he someone you could see getting into that mix this year as well, and maybe your impressions of him throughout the spring?
Yeah, I would say right now, obviously with Carson and Abu that I mentioned, it's been fun through 10 practices this spring to be able to see Dylan Lee have his days, Aiden Flora, and then River Peppers has been another guy coming in here at the mid-year, which is always tough, right? To be able to come in, to be able to handle it mentally, but also physically, and look like he knows what he's doing out there.
Coach, to revisit my first question, what sticks in your mind? You mentioned painting lines and doing all that stuff. Do you and Paulie ever reminisce a little bit about the road you guys have taken to now meet again?
Yeah, I think it's easy sometimes to be able to look back on some of the memories that we have together. We were, a funny story, we were in charge of setting up the headsets when we were at Minnesota Duluth. We ended up winning a football game at Bemidji, and the same outlet was the same outlet for the radio guy. And I won't say if it was me or Coach Paulie, but we unplugged the radio guy live on the air. We quickly plugged it back in, and I think still to this day the guy there doesn't realize we were the one that cut him off the air for about 10 seconds. But yeah, obviously to see the success that Noah's had in his career, as a friend is just awesome. He's a phenomenal person, and now to be here together is pretty awesome.
Jake, Travis Hines with the Des Moines Register. What's the approach when you have guys like Carson and Abu at times have looked like number one backs, and I think for both of them for different reasons haven't looked like number one backs? How do you approach that, and what's that dynamic like for you as a coach?
Yeah, consistency, that's the biggest thing. Preaching to both those guys, and they each have them in their own ways, right, of what they need to get better at from a consistency basis, whether that's fundamentals and technique, whether that's, mentally being aware of the situations that we're working on in practice or in the games. But, I think it's just constant communication and always being evaluating of what we need to get better at and being at the forefront of that, and being authentic with those guys and very transparent. For me, it's going to be, we're going to hold everybody in that room to the same standard, whether that's River with, being here at the mid-year or guys that have been in the program now for a handful of years. But, I think consistency is going to be the biggest piece for those guys to take the next steps.
For that, is that easier to highlight when there's competition in there, when a guy can see that guy's doing it more often than I am? I might have highs, but I have the lows that maybe that guy doesn't have, or vice versa.
Yeah, we grade every practice. You get a championship grade, you get an average grade, or you get a losing grade, and that's on every meeting room door that you would see in the building here. And guys are aware of that, right? That, we're trying to eliminate the ups and downs, that we want to continue to be consistently getting better and not have big setbacks. And we want to be able to handle the highs and handle the lows and continue to have a consistent work ethic and mindset, and I think that's just the biggest thing of if you're going to have a bad play, you got to be able to, wash it out real quick and get back to work.
Hi, Coach. Brett Twellmeyer, Iowa State Daily. I'm just curious, you've been here in Ames for a couple of months, but what was your first impression of the city, and what are some places you've got to experience here so far? Yeah,
so I was fortunate when I was at a previous school to come here and visit a couple springs ago, and when I came here and just to be able to see the facility and how awesome it is, and the fourth floor, the amount of food that's up there. But overall, Ames, I can tell it's a place that is bought into ISU athletics. Everywhere you go, you can tell that it's important. I just moved into my house a couple weeks ago, and my neighbor came over right away and wanted to know if I hated Iowa. I can tell that it's important, and I'm really fortunate that my family can be a part of a community like this.
Hey Jake, Eugene Rapay from the Des Moines Register. What were some of the things that you've learned from your previous stops that you take with you as you start your new chapter here in Ames?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's just you got to know who you are as a person and not try to fit in, and try to be somebody that you're not. Just be who you are, be authentic, be confident in what you're doing. For me, it goes back to the background of my mom and dad being teachers. I take great pride in being a good teacher, teaching our guys in the classroom. So when they do go out on the football field, that they have every tool at their disposal to be able to go out and to have success. I think, like I said, being able to work at lower levels, teaches you a lot that, you got to put in the work, and sometimes that work looks different depending on what level of football you're at, but not ever forget kind of where you came from.
There have been some North Dakota State guys that have been here recently. I'm curious, have you spoken with them, and have they imparted some advice to you as you start here?
Yeah, I have a relationship with Tyler Roll, and, it's pretty interesting. My previous stop there, I replaced him as the offensive coordinator, and now replacing him here. Having that relationship, I remember when I got the job driving down here, I talked to him on the phone for about an hour. From anything about how the program operates on a daily basis to the types of guys that are in the room. I think that's what's really cool, to be able to have those previous relationships with coaches from different spots to then be able to come in here and have an idea, of what you're getting into.